I can picture some black swans driven by AI.
Yeah, talk about them.
So AI could create a black swan if it's too successful because it's going to create PhD level workers at a cost that breaks all economic models, right? I mean, what is the value of our work if something that is not us can do it better? And then if it's combined with like a robot, then it can complete all tasks that and never tires, never needs vacation. It'll outperform every human. And in that world, and of course, if it gets sentient, then it really is a threat to like our modern civilization. Or it could even make the definition of money unimportant because robots don't care about money, right? So that I think is like one black swan outcome is that it's terrible. But what's the percentage? Of course, guys like Elon Musk and a lot of the books written about this, like the coming wave, put the odds low because humanity hopefully intervenes. The second way it's like that you've described, the setup is that the bubble bursts in AI. And I think that's going to happen for sure. Wireless and internet already give us the template because wireless was an exponential growth industry from 1990. And the growth didn't slow till, let's say, 2015. So it was one generation, 25 years of compounding growth of 40%. The wireless ecosystem from infrastructure, handsets, software, carriers, the towers, all peaked 1/3 into the cycle relative to the S&P. So they all became market performers. They peaked all at the same time. Nothing will break away. But then 10 years into the cycle, two groups broke out of wireless and captured the value. The tower industry, which was like a 10-bagger relative to everything else, and Apple, which was late. Apple was only a second chapter wireless story. So to me, the AI story is everything's going to peak at the same time, probably 1/3 into the cycle. But then in that period of consolidation and shakeout, then one or two industries truly pull away and capture the value again.
And so what does that shakeout look like? Seems like it could be ugly.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be – well, we know that you have to create capital loss for investors, like the internet bubble bursting. So when the internet bubble burst, it only triggered a mild recession. That was like in 99 because the loss was concentrated in tech mainly and some telecom, and it really hit some geographic regions very specifically. The reason we had a bigger recession after that was because of 9/11, but it really would have been a mild recession. Like that's why the GDP data was fine. And actually like 90% of stocks were doing okay. In fact, small mid caps actually positively gained during that period of time because the internet bubble bursting didn't take down the economy. I think if the AI bubble bursts, you're not winding the clock back to zero, but it may have burst because it may be bursting because someone decides to do containment, like pull the brakes on this and saying like we're too close to generative AI or we're too close to sentience.
I mean artificial general intelligence.
Yes, sorry.
Do you think that this industry is even capable of pulling the brakes? I don't.
I think people are going to have to make some decision because you're right. I think AI safety, like if we look at employment in AI safety, I think it's not even 1% of all jobs filled. If you look at the financial industry and say classified job as safety, it's more than half of the jobs is safety. So the AI industry has to invest in safety. But you're right, there's like zero incentive for safety right now.
Because the financial industry doesn't have like an open source version of finance that's trying to build the same thing and give it away, and it's sort of keeping pace with their innovations.
And now, like if we did a simple thought exercise and said, if you wanted to train morality of AI using internet, it's going to be the most unmoral entity ever, because it sees that to gain and win has nothing to do with integrity. I mean, if you trained AI on the Bible, for instance, you would raise a highly ethical, entity. So I think that's what we have to sort of fork as a society. Is like, how much sentience do we want something to have that actually has no moral guardrails, right?
Right. So the other side of it is like I mentioned, maybe the technology doesn't work as planned. It doesn't get to this part, and that I think it could mirror that same thing that you mentioned with wireless, where there were expectations of the technology that weren't going to come to fruition until a decade later. But that when you start to see that, when you're 1/3 of the cycle, you peak then. How do we know that we're 1/3 of the cycle in with AI?
Yeah. Well, I think, I can sort of give you some guidelines that I saw in the late 90s. That maybe we can just sort of say, roughly use it again today. But so in 1997, I wrote this report called the Mobile Data Report, which was actually the first report that Solomon Brothers ever produced about how the wireless industry could actually replace computers. It's what mobile data, what you could be doing. And, we ended up companies like WorldCom use this report to do their wireless strategy. But we thought mobile data could be a $40 billion business by 15 years out, so 2010 or whatever. And it turns out that mobile data turned out to be vastly bigger, but the stocks didn't do that well. And actually, the companies that captured mobile data was Meta, which didn't even exist in the 90s, right? It was OmniSky. That was the company in the 90s, and Palm Pilot, but they ceased to exist. So Palm Pilot would have been the first iteration of an iPhone, right? So I think today, or back then, what I noticed was people had to play with their models to justify valuations. So cost of money had to go to 5%. And then the terminal PE, or what you call the terminal multiple, was higher than the best stocks we're trading at today. So you had to re-rate the entire industry to justify the valuations. So you knew that someone was going to take a loss because these are unrealistically funded models. So, NVIDIA's not crazy today, because it's 30 times earnings, which is not a premium. I mean, Toyota traded at 40 times earnings for years in the 90s just making cars, and NVIDIA is not making a car. They're making a really difficult to replicate chip. So I guess we're not there yet, but you'll know because everyone's having to fake their model to explain why they're still buying the stock.
But let's talk about the private companies. I mean, I know it's private, so everything is different in the private market, but OpenAI is in the middle of this. We know they're at least getting 10 billion, maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40. They lost $6 billion last year. They're probably going to lose money this year. They're not going to make money, according to their projections, till 2029. Now, if they work and they reach AGI, great. If they don't, what happens?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, let's say, the OpenAI and the peer group collectively isn't multiple trillions, right? So but it is, nearly $1 trillion ultimately when we get to the peak evaluation for all these things. It's not that different than what happened to when the internet bubble burst. Fiber industry really consumed so much capital. I don't know if you followed the CLEX back then, but they were digging up rail lines, digging up cities to lay fiber. And then people said after the internet bubble burst, there's so much fiber, we're never going to use any of it. We have so much excess capacity. But after the bubble burst and fiber prices collapsed, a couple things happened. The second owner of a hotel made money. So the people who ended up owning these, and then because you lowered the price, there was a lot of innovation. It created travel companies. Expedia wouldn't exist without Netflix couldn't exist without collapsing fiber prices. Although Netflix actually never paid for carriage, but the internet streaming became profitable. And So I think that will happen with a lot of code, that it may be re-rated, as you said, because it's so open sourced. And I'm not making a prediction. I'm just saying that
Right.
that's a
What to look
possibility.
for. So let's just talk briefly about one more thing when we talk about this potential Black Swan event with AI, and it's going to your first point of it becomes too successful. So you mentioned that, like, okay, if AI can do PhD level work, then basically people won't be able to make money working, and society could fall apart. The story that the AI companies tell is that we'll have abundance and everybody will have exactly what they need, and you can have one person that will do whatever they want because they'll have these data warehouses of geniuses behind them. Why? So when you went to the Black Swan possibilities, you didn't take that side. You took almost the other position. Why is that?
Well, I think it's possible that it's exactly what you described, which is all of our needs are met without needing to work. So housing and food and, I don't know, a lot of recreational activities. It means the monetary system probably ceases to exist. I mean, because then, for instance, do you need to go to get an Ivy League education? Or do you need to be the best student in your class when your robot's always going to be smarter than the smartest human in the class? You know, like it's going to change what we define as achievement. Like, why do we work hard? I mean, it's some people might consider it nirvana because, let's say, the 10% of the people do aspirational, like that they live their life aspirationally. Like that's when we grew up, not everybody wanted to be the best. But when you look at societal impact or in a company, like at my former employer, which had 200,000 employees, the adage was always 20% did 80% of the work, or really like 8% did 90% of the work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, there's no incentive system for that anymore in a world of abundance. So I do think the consequences, money may stop mattering.
And then if we're able to do whatever we want, then why wouldn't there be a situation where everybody gets everything they need if money doesn't matter?
Sure, but then stocks may not matter.
Yeah.
Or what is a company anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not a group of highly skilled people. And if it's a group of highly skilled robots, well, anyone can copy the code. So then there's no advantage for a company. I mean, it's actually probably like some people might say that's a good. I think that would be kind of a very dangerous outcome.